You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
Stay hungry.
Hungry. Foolish. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
This is the E-Commerce All-Stars podcast, brought to you with heart by Nadimo.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's podcast. It's your host, Brandon Moskwa, of course. And today I'm excited. We have Paul Miller on the line. He's an e-commerce merchant and licensing expert. He's also a brand owner and licensee and licensor. And so we're going to talk a lot about licensing and some white labeling discussion here today. How are you, Paul?
I'm doing great, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to talking about some of this. I'm a little bit, in some ways, I get skeptical in the world of licensing, but there's also a good tie-in into the white labeling side of things, and so I'm looking forward to talking about that. And really, I mean, you've had a lot of success with licensing, and I have not, and that's why I was curious about having you on the show and really having a good discussion on it and educating people out there. So I'm looking forward to that. I'd love it if you could give people a little bit more of a background introduction of who you are and what you've done, and then that way we can kind of, just set the tone and talk about some of these topics here.
Oh, sure thing. Thanks. Well, I kind of made the leap into e-commerce in 2015. Been an entrepreneur most of my life. Before e-commerce, I was actually a multi-store restaurant owner, but that wasn't going so well. So and looked for other opportunities and discovered e-commerce. And more specifically, I started as an Amazon seller, basically as a private label seller, and developed a product which was kind of commonly available at the time. They were sleep headphones. Don't know if you've ever heard of those or not, but we developed a brand around that, which I later called Cozy Phones. Created some styles, color styles, variations, made some modifications, kind of made it our own product along the way. And had some very, very good success with that. So from 2015 to, last year, 2017, we ended up doing over $4 million in sales just for 2017. 2018 is looking pretty good. And a good portion of those sales came from some of our products where we've utilized licensed IP or licensed characters from Nickelodeon, and I'd be happy to tell you more about that. But we found quite a nice niche in being able to differentiate our product from other sellers on Amazon and other platforms by teaming up with licensors of intellectual property like Nickelodeon.
No, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, because that's one thing. I'm a big fan of white labeling, and I'm also a big fan of how you can be a niche and find your own little space. And maybe not necessarily little space, but your own space in a market. And I just hearing about the success you've had so far in the last 3 to 4 years, getting over $4 million in sales. I'd just love to hear a lot more about that and the Nickelodeon deal and how all of that kind of unfolded. Again, you started, correct me if I'm wrong, you started as a private label and then grew that outwards. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So really in the very beginning, I started with a manufacturer's label and used that as testing ground to see if there was a market for that product. I created a good listing for it, did some promotions and had some initial success with the manufacturer's brand. And then I quickly replaced their label with mine and we then began to try to differentiate the product from, other people who might just white label a similar product by modifications of styles, patterns, textures, and features and benefits. So that's kind of how we developed the private label brand.
Very cool. And then from there, how did you go about expanding it into licensing? Because I know one of the things that I've run into, and I guess when I said in the beginning I haven't had a lot of success with it, I'm actually talking about from the opposite perspective of where I've worked with companies that have wanted to become essentially, I'm not sure, I think it's the licensor, where you're trying to sell your brand to people to put it on their products, etc. But what I'm curious about is in regards to, taking your product and then expanding it into, getting licenses for, like, for example, for Nickelodeon. I know that can be quite expensive. And my understanding is there's a lot of risk involved in because of those costs and that sort of thing. But could you maybe expand on how you went ahead doing that and what your successes or struggles have also been?
Sure. You just covered a bunch of topics in licensing and why it is kind of confusing. Who's the licensee, who's the licensor, the agreement, the risk, the investment required. But I'll just go back and kind of take you through, my experience. I'm both a licensee and a licensor. Basically, after about my second year into the business, we kind of created this category for children's products. It's a headband headphone with our own original characters on it. And that took off. I was looking for ways to really grow and protect my brand because, as you know, there are a lot of people who don't care about patents or patent applications. There are plenty of copycats out there. So I sought advice from other folks on how I could protect my brand. And one of the folks that I spoke to mentioned licensing. He said, if I were you, I would look into licensing. I didn't know anything about it at all. So I went to the Las Vegas Licensing Expo that year, which happened to be coming up within a couple of months. And I kind of got my feet wet in licensing and learned what it means. From my perspective, what I was looking to do is take somebody else's popular character or intellectual property, they call them properties, and put that onto my product. So imagine a headband, for example, with a popular character on it. Let's say SpongeBob. That's a Nickelodeon character. So what my goal was to license a character. In the beginning, the first folks I talked to actually was Disney. I spoke with Disney, Hasbro, and Nickelodeon, and take their characters and basically rent the right to use those characters on my product. That means that I would be the licensee, they would be the licensor in that scenario. They are the ones who own the property, and they're going to rent it to me or license it to me over a period of time for a very specific use on my product. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, actually. It's very well articulated.
So I didn't know anything about it in those early days. I did meet with another entrepreneur who is a children's book author, and she had a series of characters. And my very first license was with her. The character is called the What If Monster. It's just it's a monster character book that kind of teaches confidence in kids. Okay. And so we made this my cozy phones in the monster style. And in that case, she was a licensor, I was a licensee. And then once we had some initial success with that, we kind of took it up a few notches and started talking to some of the big players, like I mentioned, Disney, Hasbro, and Nickelodeon. We finally settled on Nickelodeon for our first kind of major league license.
And so with that, just to share a little bit more on how that side of things works with people. Basically, you're renting the right to put Nickelodeon characters on your product.
Exactly. You know, first of all, I'll tell you the benefit that I see from it, and the benefit that I see to brand owners and e-commerce folks are, you get to differentiate your product, and you have that protectable IP that in most cases nobody else is going to have, right? So if you've got and let's say that you sell umbrellas, for example, and you've got you own the rights to put Disney princess on your umbrella. Most of the time, nobody else is going to have those rights for that particular product. So it really gives you a lot of differentiation.
Right. Well, and then going back to what you were talking about, protecting yourself with your characters, and then the people who don't really care about those types of patents or whatnot, patent applications or whatnot. When you're dealing with a license like this, I would imagine that the company that has sold you the rights also has a lot more tout and clout, I guess is the word I'm looking for, and they have a legal team behind them and all sorts of things to help take care of those infringements of sorts.
You're right. They have basically a lot more horsepower than you and I have. Someone's going to think twice about trying to rip off a Disney or Nickelodeon than they will, say, me or you as a small private label seller.
Exactly. And then here's the all-encompassing question. And when you did make those licensing agreements, the whole idea there obviously is not just for what you're talking about, but also to grow your sales.
Exactly.
So I'd imagine that your sales grew exponentially once you started putting SpongeBob or one of the Nickelodeon characters on your product.
Yeah, well, it really opened up a lot of different opportunity. For us, it not only did it, kind of add to my product line. I was basically the same basic product, but I'm making a variation with these characters on it. And our first set of characters was from Paw Patrol. In case you have little kids, you'll know Paw Patrol. It's one of the most successful licenses out there. So what's really cool about that is you get this immediate brand recognition and acceptance from this, huge audience of Paw Patrol that already exists out there. So that gives you a lot of credibility right out of the gate. And then the other thing that it does, it gives you credibility. If you expand into other sales channels and even into retail or distribution, if someone, say a distributor, you talk to a distributor and you show them your product that has a Nickelodeon or a Disney on it, that gives you great credibility. So it gives you opportunity in additional sales channels as well.
Right on. Yeah, I've been actually speaking with a lot of different e-commerce entrepreneurs over the last, almost a year and a half specifically on the show. But and there's just so many different ways to skin a cat, so to speak. And I've just been, but there's all these different things, and this is one of them that I haven't really given a lot of credence to, because for me it's always, the cost involved in that scares me. But then when you talk about the things you just did, which is, the credibility it adds, and credibility increases your overall selling power, as well as, like you said, you can get your manufacturing costs down in some ways because you have that extra credibility. And so it adds it gives you so much more leverage, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it really does. It takes, it adds a completely new aspect to your business, but it doesn't come without, significant investment in time and energy, money, and risk, like you said. There's quite a few things involved in a license that you really have to consider before you jump into licensing.
I know that we like to keep the show short, but I would love it if you could kind of just give a very high level of what some of those like pitfalls are that maybe people wanting to go into licensing are doing it, but then or want to do it, but they may not realize some of those types of things that they need to watch out for.
Yeah, I'll give you just a really high level view of what a license looks like and some of the requirements. So usually, a license is for a specific what they call property or a character, for a specific for a specific product. So you would have to outline that out, right? And you got to ask yourself, does this license make sense for my property? One of the greatest examples I give all the time is the George Foreman grill, right?
Mm-hmm.
George Foreman wasn't making those grills, but he lended his name to the grill, and it was a great fit, right? Because healthy eating, low fat, and so forth. So it was a great product, property fit. But each license is usually going to come with what they call a minimum guarantee, and that's a guaranteed royalty percentage that you have to pay that licensor, whether or not you sell any product. It's a contract over a period of time. It might be 3 or 4 years. And, you're going to guarantee them a certain amount of dollars. And they're going to want a portion of that guarantee paid in advance when you sign the contract. So there's the minimum guarantee royalty percentage and the advance. Those are, or at least the advance, that's an upfront cost. And then you have, the production expenses that you have to incur to create that product with that property on it. And you have to go through, very completely different approval process with the licensor than you would have to do on your own. So, you have to be willing to take that on as well and be willing to go through some, extensive approvals.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to consider is, is your factory capable of producing a licensed product, and would it pass an inspection, for example? Most of the licensors are going to require that you have a factory that would comply, with their ethical standards and safety standards, for example. So it's, I don't want to sugarcoat licensing. The opportunities are tremendous, but, it's not for the beginner, and the investment can be significant.
Exactly, and it's one of those things like you want to make sure that you have to have that capability. And so when you say it's not for the beginner, I often think of it more in regards to, okay, you've been in the business, you've been doing, X number of dollars in sales, and you know that you're going to continue doing, at the very least, this level of sales. And so then you have that built up revenue stream, so to speak, and customer base. You're going to be able to pay the royalties, etc. And so you're right. It's not for beginners. It's for people who have a somewhat established sales record, for lack of a better word. I always watch. Well, I haven't watched it in a while, but I used to watch. In Canada, it's the Dragon's Den, and in the U.S., it's the Shark Tank.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to always love it when one of the sharks, for example, would try and sweeten the pot by adding, we'll give you a free licensing. And I'm thinking, well, geez, that's worth a lot of money, like to be able to put, their name or their brand on your products. And a lot of the time, those people that are standing right in front of them don't really realize the value in what they're offering, and just that alone. And like you said, all those extra costs and commitments that you have to make. So, yeah. Anyways, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Well, I think that people need to think, very carefully about all the pros and cons of licensing before you jump into it. I'll just say that I had no experience going in. So being open-minded is huge. As you probably know, I have a free course out there called at nextlevellicensing.com. So that's just kind of an introduction 3-video course. If people want to go through that, they get the basics of licensing, helped you make the decision of whether or not you want to go into it. Eventually, I'll probably put out a paid course, but it's not there yet. What I have out there now really gives you a good basics of deciding it's something or not you want to pursue. And then from there, you can take it from there and dig into the details later.
Awesome. And I'll make sure we put those up in the show notes for sure. Do you have any final parting words of wisdom, and how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think the words of wisdom are just don't be afraid to go into a whole new category like this. Keep an open mind and investigate all the pros and cons. And people can get me on LinkedIn is probably the best way. Just look up Paul Miller, and there'll probably be 100 of them. But if you do Paul Miller Cozy Phones, which is my main brand name, you'll be able to connect with me there.
Right on. And again, I'll put that in the show notes as well for you, Paul.
Super.
Well, thanks a lot for being on the show. I think we've covered a lot in a short period of time, but kind of opened up some different perspectives on licensing for a lot of people out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate it.
You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
Stay hungry.
Hungry. Foolish. Stay hungry. Stay foolish.
This is the E-Commerce All-Stars podcast, brought to you with heart by Nadimo.com.